It's Wednesday morning on KSJE. Joining me now via our virtual radio studio, Dr. Eugene Schmidt is here this morning from Farmington Municipal Schools. Dr. Schmidt, good morning. It's good to see you.
Scott, good morning to you, and happy holidays for those coming up for the next couple of days.
Very true. We are almost at Thanksgiving, and so it's great to get an update from you on how things are going at Farmington Schools. And so we will kind of get right to it and talk a little bit about where things stand this far in the fall semester, and as your students and staff probably get ready for the Thanksgiving break, if they're not on it already, and then the winter break coming up in just a few more weeks, right?
Yes, there's a lot to celebrate, and so I feel really good about how far we have progressed into this school year and what will be that race to finish up before the Christmas break. But again, a lot of things to be thankful. We'll talk about those today.
Okay.
As we talk about those, we want to share with our community that the reasons that we've shifted back to remote learning, because we really celebrated more than a month, almost 2 months of in-person learning. And I want to again remind the community why that decision was made. And there's other kinds of things I think that the community would be interested in today, and that's what the enrollment trends look like. And as part of that, Scott, we'll talk a little bit about there's some students we need to find. And we'll also talk today a little bit about connecting with our high school seniors who are on their race to the finish line for their diploma. There's a lot of work yet to be done. And I know that if your senior year was like mine, Scott, we fell into this trap called senioritis. And so we want to talk to my seniors today about finishing strong. We also have some COVID updates. Again, it's
Right.
The school is trying to be more transparent, more visible in how we go about reporting not only to the state, the New Mexico Department of Health, but also just to our own community. So we've come up with a new form that we will be putting online that people can just click into if they have a daily curiosity about COVID, because even this week, as an example, Scott, teachers and students are on break for the whole week, but we still get reports of COVID cases being confirmed. And so I'm interested in chatting and sharing with the community how we are trying to be transparent. So anyhow, a lot to talk about.
Okay.
And for those that maybe are not watching this thing in person, we will have pictures from time to time that the viewers can see.
That's right.
And one of those is a reminder that the school cares about kids even though we are on break. And I was talking with the meal department a day ago, and we had delivered over 5,000 Thanksgiving meals before we went back to remote, or we made the shift back into remote learning. So the Thursday last, it was kind of our Thanksgiving meal before we sent the kids home, and 5,000 kids had a Thanksgiving early lunch, and then that was followed by over 1,200, we call them a 7-day meal pack, that we sent food with needy kids home for really the whole Thanksgiving break. So it really pleases me that we have a food department that is trying to make sure that our most needy kids have a meal waiting for them. And again, if they were also able to see the pictures that you and I can see about what's up with Farmington, I wanted to give a shout out as we talk about thanks. I wanted to give a shout out to our maintenance and custodial who are tasked with the daily, challenge to make sure that our kids are safe at school through clean and sanitary rooms and disinfecting for COVIDs. But one of the things that our custodial maintenance staff did that I thought was just wonderful is how much of all of those, sanitary plexiglass that you see as you go into downtown. Oftentimes you have to talk through bank tellers or salespeople at the different big box stores.
Right.
But the school has done that as well. But we made ours, and what would please our taxpayers is that by making all of these plexiglass shields, whether they be for teachers or the nursing staff or the secretaries at school, is we made those. And then, before we really jump too deeply into the other thanks I want to give is always a shout out to our school nurse and health clinic staffs, how they are working to monitor the number of not only cases that are confirmed, but how that leads to having to quarantine. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we get deeper into the dive of today's show. But I just wanted to give a couple of quick shout outs is that the transportation and meal department care, the custodial staff in their efforts to save taxpayers money by building our own plexiglass shields for the different offices, as well as the different efforts the school is using to screen kids to arrive at school safe. So a lot of that to jumpstart. And
okay.
So with that, let's get into the story then.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you are also thankful for. And I know, and again, for our viewers, you always send along some great photos of some of the folks at the district and activities around the district. So I appreciate you being able to send those to me so we can share them with the audience at large. So there's a lot of things that are going on as kids move in and out of at-home learning, right?
Yes, and what our viewers see and what our listeners should understand is it's important we mask up. We've made a real vigilant, diligent protocol for kids and staff to mask up when they're at school. So I want to just give a thanks to the parents, and as part of that, the parents, and we will return to in-person learning. We'll talk about that in the course of this hour, Scott.
Right.
But just the fact that we have an amazing staff. And so number one, it goes to all of our school teachers, leaders, and the parents. But there's a lot of people involved in making sure that public education continues, even as we have those moments of learning in purpose or in person, and those moments of learning at home. But just a great effort, how much has been done. And I know that we look back upon March 13th as like decades ago,
right?
But between March 13th and it's still 2020, and we're still doing this in person and remote learning, but just the work that the teachers have done to recraft, reinvent, repurpose, redesign, it's just a wonderful story. And so teachers, my school leaders, and our parents who are our home first teachers, this is a partnership that's working, and we just celebrate and give thanks during this holiday season.
Very true. Well, and I think what's notable too, Dr. Schmidt, is as large as the Farmington School District is, and certainly there are larger districts in our state, but it is the largest one here locally, of course, that you have been able to kind of turn on a dime, or a pretty big dime, but still a dime, when you had to make these changes, right? Whether it's moving back to virtual or whatever the new recommendations may be. And for any large organization, anyone who's involved in a large organization knows just how complicated that can be if it's not done properly and if you don't have a team that's all kind of pulling in the same direction.
Yes, and I appreciate that. And I again, it's a credit to the teachers and staff, but literally we have learned to shift into remote, shift back out, shift back in. And our hope is that to come Martin Luther King the Tuesday after, we will once again be shifting back into in-person. So there's a lot going on, a lot to be celebrating. So let me talk about the whole background story. And
okay, sure.
One of the things that we were tracking with great interest is not only COVID in our school system, but within all of the four corners, New Mexico and the nation as well. And we watched with excitement back in Oh, it was towards the 18th of September when we were petitioning the state to let us come back for in-person learning. The COVID, the positivity rates, and I'm sure that you've had experts on your station talking about what the positivity rate is, but under 5 is good, over 5 is not good.
Right.
And the closer you can get to 3 or 1, that's what happens. And so there was a moment in time back in September where the positivity rate for San Juan County went below 5. And that was that moment we petitioned the state, said, let us reopen, let us shift back to in-person learning. And as you recall, we had about 2,500 kids that had made that choice, not only pre-K through the 5th grade, but kindergarten through 12th grade for our most at-risk special ed kids. And so we ran almost from the start of the school year a Jump Start program for high needs kids, and eventually the state granted us permission to shift into a in-person learning for pre-K through 5. Well, what happens is that positivity rate that we had hoped would stay below 5 began to creep up higher, and it was with interest that kids began to report from our at-home learning, and staff as well. Eventually, COVID cases did come into the school from outside. And we're going to show them a little, our listeners, a chart here in a while that they can click on. But we're tracking how many cases of COVID came from home into the school. And with that, and the reason that we eventually made the choice to shift back into remote just before the Thanksgiving break was because of the number, not so much COVID cases, but the number of people who had to quarantine because of it.
Right.
And as an example, we probably had 20 or more staff in the virtual world, about the same number, and staff could be food service, it could be bus drivers, could be custodian, could be teachers. It's just not all teachers, but between that group of in-person and at home, somewhere in the neighborhood of 140 staff members were in quarantine. Only about 40 actually had confirmed COVID, but because of contacts, because of bump-ins by state definition, if you're in close proximity to a person 3 minutes or more, then you're supposed to go into quarantine. So we literally had to quarantine classrooms. You know, as an example, Animas Elementary, we sent 4 sections of 4th grade home because of a confirmed case that would have impacted 4 different classrooms. So it really is a case of caring about our staff, our students, in a case of being cautious. It was my decision, based upon recommendations from my senior leadership team, that we just do a reset by just sending kids home. And then it became the concern, will people actually stay home as opposed to travel out of state, maybe go to larger gatherings, that I viewed it was in the best interest to stay in the shift to home until after Martin Luther King. So that's significant, Scott, because that's about a 10 or 12 day quarantine after the Christmas and New Year's break. And so
right.
In our conversations with the Public Education Department, it is our intent to return to learn. And importantly, and I would want the community to hear this, that we are also having conversations with the Public Education Department that I want to bring back more than just pre-K-5. That is there a way that the state would allow us, not only to bring back our Jump Start, which are our K through 12 most needy special ed children, but is there a way to bring back small cohorts of groups of kids who are academically at risk? And so while many people are on Thanksgiving break, I'm in conversations with like-minded superintendents from around the state to say, can we find, for example, Rio Rancho, Santa Fe, maybe Alamogordo, Carlsbad, Hobbs, are there school districts in New Mexico that think that if given the opportunity to bring back kids safely in some small cohorts, can we do that and then use that as a model to bring back larger numbers of kids? Because all of us feel terrible, Scott, that our kids aren't having that traditional middle school or high school experience. And we want to demonstrate through patience, understanding, following the data, that we think that San Juan County and Farmington especially can bring kids back in small group settings to prove to the state that middle and high school kids should be able to shift back into some kind of in-person learning. So that is my mission, even as I'm having families continue the at-home shift in learning until we can have those conversations with the public education department. So let me be very clear, because I know that, there were times I said, write the governor and tell us we want to be in person, and somehow that has been misinterpreted by some that it is the governor that shut us down. The governor didn't cause the shift to remote learning. That is a decision that my leadership team made, wanting to make sure that the safety of our staff and students were paramount during this effort to understand COVID and how it grows through a community. So just as we have shifted to remote, it is my plan that we will be taking to the state a plan to shift back into remote after the holidays. So this is my Scott Michlin challenge to the community: is behave.
Okay.
Behave, and we'll get back to in-person learning.
I think that's a good challenge, because our numbers are really quite different than they were maybe even a month ago during our last conversation, Dr. Schmidt. So I think you were a bit ahead of the curve, literally talking about maybe going back to that remote learning to keep the spread as limited as we can. Let me ask you a bit about your enrollments. You mentioned that a little bit, and trying to, I guess, find students that maybe were enrolled at Farmington schools and maybe disenrolled or haven't come back to school. And I know you try to track, if parents want to do homeschooling or learning from home, that's one choice. But you kind of have a responsibility to, at least I think you feel you have a responsibility to make sure every child in the community has access to education.
Yes, and so thank you for that. And I'm going to give a lot of numbers in a short amount of time for those viewers who are online with us watching virtually. I will try and describe to the ones that are just listening by radio today. So a lot of numbers. We do what we call a 40-day count. So on the 40th day of the school year, we use that as an opportunity to test against the previous year. And curiously, Scott, the 40th day always seems to be the highest enrollment. It then begins to fade. People show up after Labor Day, then by early in October, which is about the 40th day, then over the rest of the year, the number kind of gradually declines a little bit. But on the 40th day, we, from a year ago, it's 40th day school year 20, which was ended last spring,
right,
was 11,150. The 40th day of what we call school year 21, which is school year 2021 that ends in May, we had 10,628. So, that's alarmist, because that's 552 kids.
Right.
And it's more interesting and perhaps alarming than that, in that if you can go back to the end of the school year, which would be that school year 20, back in May, to now, we have had over 1,100 kids either sign out or sign back in. And so when you look at that 1062, that represents about 500 and some kids, there's really over 1,000 that have come and gone.
Wow.
And still we're close. And so there's a lot of movement going on in our community. I watch and I worry a lot about that. So you talked about, homeschool, for example. Just since the start of this school year, which would have been about the 18th or so of August, 549 have withdrawn and have left the school system. And we try and track and understand, so where do people go? And from the information that parents tell us is that of that, 132 have registered for homeschool. And so that's important to us because we often hear parents say, we either don't like the in-person learning or we don't feel that school is safe, and so we're going to register for homeschool. And we will continue to track that number because certainly when we get a vaccine or we hope that things better or improve medically, that these kids will choose to come back and re-enter the school system. But it impacts the school because we will receive less funding for kids who have left the school system. And so when we talk about numbers like 549 kids down from just the start of the school year, another 500 or so that are different between the two 40-day counts, that's going to have a significant financial consequence to the school district. So what I offer to our community is that if you're out in that home school mode, we want you to come back into the school system, that there's a place, that we welcome you to come back tomorrow, and that would be wonderful. So again, for our people who can't see what's going on because they don't have access, just to give you a few ideas, again, 549 have withdrawn. Of that, we think 122 or 132 registered for homeschool. We do know that 128 have transferred in-state because we actually have those requests or records. Mm-hmm. And we have 167. So this is, again, a serious concern for Farmington and our community is 167 transferred out of state. And so it's a community that's on the move, that almost 300 kids, have left to live or work in other parts of the state or country. So that's an important thing that we need to reflect on, is that there does seem to be a job loss in our community, and it is being reflected through student movement out of the district. And then, as our viewers can see, Scott, we have 89 that have transferred to either private schools or Bureau of Indian Education schools. Equally concerning, Scott, is that we've identified at least 17 of our high school students who have withdrawn to pursue a GED. We talk to these young people, say, well, what's up? And we are hearing more and more that our high school students need to help the families financially. And so that is a concern. Again, it's a reflection of job loss or the fiscal instability that's in New Mexico right now. And all of those, we talk about canaries in coal mines and things, and all of those are little warning signs that are a reflection of the economic health of our community that seems at risk right now. And so we as a school will continue to educate kids. We want to welcome kids back. My 17 GED kids, let us work with you. The people who are registered for homeschool, let us work with you to help you keep engaged with the school, because I believe there's no greater place in public education.
Very good. Well, those are kind of shocking numbers to some extent, Dr. Schmidt, but I guess it's not surprising necessarily. I think you were expecting some of these things with all the changes. Is that true?
Yes, and that's it's really a nice question to be asking. We superintendents in San Juan County have been conversing for a couple of years. We've been watching the number of drilling rigs go down, and
right.
as people relocate, we've watched as some of the bigger companies, Halliburton, for example, recently auctioned off a piece of property. We bought the 30th Street building, from a large oil company that had left town, ConocoPhillips, some years ago. So just in the 5 years that I've had the honor of serving as superintendent, we have watched bigger companies leave. We've seen some smaller companies come in that have done well, but in the overall picture, there is just that gradual decline. And if I can look back at my notes, I was reading some stories about what is the drilling rig status in New Mexico. And again, this is a kind of a foreshadowing. Something like 117 drill rigs were operational in 2019. The information that I'm looking at suggests that about 57 of those are still operational in New Mexico.
Right.
The good news is the Permian Basin seems to have figured out how to begin bringing back oil rigs, even when the cost of oil is about $40 a barrel. That they figured out a balancing point. And so I do expect that, that Hobbs, Artesia, Clovis, that southeast, place
right.
connected close to the Permian, that's going to probably see a rebound. And that rebound will then move up through New Mexico. And maybe some of those kids that moved away will have a chance to reconnect back here in Farmington. But right now, the economics of New Mexico is, I think right now it's lagging, but I through my studies of the oil rigs and interest in drilling, that our part of the Southwest will bounce back faster than the Wyomings, the Pennsylvanias, the North Dakotas, and that's a good thing.
That would be a good thing locally for sure. But even those numbers that you mentioned, Dr. Schmidt, in the Permian are certainly a lot lower rig counts than they were just maybe 6-8 months ago, I would think, just off the top of my head. We just have a couple of minutes remaining this morning, Dr. Schmidt. I know you want to talk about your seniors and that senioritis that you mentioned that we all want to try to avoid if we can, but that's contagious sometimes. So talk to me a little bit about what parents of seniors can do and seniors, if they're listening or watching, what they need to do to kind of finish the year strong.
Yes, and the first thing is it's about attitude, and we can. The old si se puede, yes we can. We can do this. And my hope is that school leaders, the teachers of all of our kids are reaching out. There's still time. And time is that very quick race from we come back on from our Thanksgiving break to that end of December, around the 17th or 20th or so. So we've got it's a sprint to the finish. And there's a lot of kids, and in fact, we did some early projections. Keep in mind, we have about 700 seniors. I saw that at least 138 had one low grade that we need to be focusing on. So we're in Thanksgiving break. There's a chance to use some of that time to perhaps catch up on your work. As our viewers can see, Scott, the surest pathway is to sprint to the finish, that finish the year strong, and then we come back in January, and then it's a quick 3 months to graduation. So for our seniors, it seems to be kind of an annual event. Let's ratchet it down. Let's focus on learning. Let's make up some of that work that may or may not have been turned in yet, and we're going to get you to the graduation line.
There you go. But this is a great opportunity to use some of this break time to maybe catch up on some of those things that are lacking. So I think that's good advice. probably not just for seniors, but for maybe everybody in your other grades that are maybe a little bit behind too. At least that's what I tell my students. So, and then finally, Dr. Schmidt, let's talk a little bit about COVID. I know, the Farmington School District has been very transparent about releasing information about positive cases and what those individuals were exposed to or not, depending on if they were in a building or not in a building as we shifted in and out of in-person learning. You sent along, I know, the graph of our numbers here in New Mexico and San Juan County. The yellow line on the screen for our viewers who are showing the cases per week in the county, which are now higher than they were back in our earlier peak in May. And then the blue line along the bottom is the death counts in San Juan County on a relatively daily basis, which thankfully are fairly flat and low. But then on the next page, and this is what I think you want to talk about, Dr. Schmidt, is your dashboard on the district's website that you will start to kind of roll out and kind of breaking down these numbers by schools and staff and students and things like that, to give a lot of information at a glance.
Yes, and so I want to give a shout out to Mike Maestas from the county, who provides us with that 14-day rolling count.
This one, yep.
And that is important because we use that in trying to understand, is it safe to be in the in-person, or should we begin thinking about shifting to the remote? And so Mike, if you're out there, I appreciate this, and keep sending me these things, because we track the data to make sure that our schools are safe. And so, Scott, if you can go to the next slide again very quickly. For the community, this is something that we posted on our website, and it has every school. It has two different sets of numbers. One is for at-home learning, one is for in-person learning. And obviously for the next couple of weeks, the in-person learning will look more heavily weighted to at home.
Right.
This particular data point was from last Friday. And so even since the early part of the week, we know that a number of at-home confirmed cases have been identified, and we continue to track. But we are trying to make it known, and importantly, for our listeners and our viewers, Scott, keep in mind we have almost 11,000 kids. We have 1,500 employees, and when you look at that, you say, okay, that's about 40 staff members out of 1,500. It's like 42 kids out of 11,000. And so that is safe, but we also need to understand that for every COVID case, there's a quarantine of somebody else.
Right.
And oftentimes it becomes that whole class, which is why we are shifting to remote learning for a while. But if we can get that, go back to that other slide where Mike sent us with a little yellow line. If we can get that thing going back down, I think that there's a strong case to be made that let me bring back more than just elementary. Let me bring back K-12. So that's my hope to the community, and that's my Thanksgiving ask to you.
There you go. Well, and that's the way to do it, is to follow these COVID-safe practices, Dr. Schmidt, and I know that's what the state keeps reminding us of, and you keep reminding us of, but that number, the way it's going, unless it starts to dramatically come down, we really needed to do that, because we're not going to be able to reopen much of anything, unfortunately, with the numbers the way they are today. But Dr. Schmidt, I appreciate you being with me today, and thank you very much. We are out of time, but I want to wish you and your family a very happy Thanksgiving.
And you as well. And to all our community, we're going to get through this, and we're going to get back to learning in person at some time in the future. We'll
look forward to that, and I know you'll be here to announce it when that happens, Dr. Schmidt. Stay well and stay safe, and thank you very much.
And you as well.
Thank you. That is Dr. Eugene Schmidt. He is the superintendent of schools with the Farmington School District. My guest here on KSJE. Back with more in just a moment, everybody.